To put this reading in context, after washing the disciples' feet, predicting his betrayal, and then revealing his betrayer, Jesus speaks of his glorification on the cross. This deep, complicated love of Jesus, even to death on a cross, will be the distinctive mark of Jesus' community. The Holy Gospel according to St. John. When he had gone out, Jesus said, "Now the Son of Man has been glorified, and God has been glorified in him. If God has been glorified in him, God will also glorify him in himself and will glorify him at once. Little children, I am with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and as I said to the Jews, so now I say to you, where I am going, you cannot come. I give you a new commandment, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also should love one another. By this everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." The Gospel of the Lord. Martin Luther once remarked that every day creation speaks to us of the ways of God. And I would agree with that. And so over the years, I've gathered sermon illustrations from nature. And so I have stories about trees and sheep, snakes, wolves, fish, hermit crabs, to name but a few. But my favorite is the story of the geese. And I first began noticing geese when I was attending seminary in Minnesota. Now, Minnesota is located on the Mississippi Flyway. And so every year, spring and fall, there would be a couple of weeks when the geese would be migrating. And there would just be flock after flock of Canada geese, snow geese, thousands of them. And you would hear them off honking in the distance, go outside and look up, and you'd see them in their tight V formation, high there in the sky. Just a beautiful, beautiful sight. And then some years ago, my parents sent me an article from their church newsletter. It was called Lessons from the Geese. And the author began by explaining why it is that geese fly in a V formation. It seems that scientists have discovered that as each bird flaps its wings, it's creating an updraft for the bird immediately following. And it's estimated by flying in that way, in that formation, that the whole flock can add at least 70% to their flying range that if each bird flew alone. And she then went on to give 4 lessons that we might take from the geese. Number 1, whenever a goose falls out of formation, it immediately begins to feel the resistance and the drag of trying to go it alone, and quickly moves back into formation to take advantage of the lift of the bird in front of it. Number 2, whenever the lead goose gets tired, it rotates back along the V, and another bird moves forward to fly the point. Number 3, only the geese at the back of the formation honk, apparently to encourage those at the front to keep up the pace. And number 4, when a goose is sick or injured, 2 other birds fall out of the formation and follow it to the ground. And they stay with it there until it's either sufficiently recovered and able to fly again, or it dies. And only then do they either rejoin their original flock or they're taken in by a new one. And so the geese speak to us of cooperation, community, shared leadership, and care. And to me, it paints such a clear picture of what the church is meant to be. The church is like a flock of geese. For each of us, the journey of faith begins with the decision to follow Jesus. And that decision is made in the deepest part of our heart and soul. It's very personal, and yet our relationship with Jesus, though personal, is never private. And the first followers learned that if they were going to call Jesus their Lord, then there were going to be a whole lot of other people that they were going to be calling brother and sister. To follow Jesus is to be a part of community. To be committed to Jesus is to be committed to his body, to be committed to the church. Now, the gospel lesson for this morning comes from one of the deepest points of Jesus' ministry. It's the night before the cross, and the disciples' world is about to explode, and Jesus is trying to prepare them for what's coming. He shared the Passover meal with them, began the Lord's Supper. But in John's telling of the Lord's Supper, the institution of the Lord's Supper, there is no bread and wine. There are no words of institution. No, John instead focuses on something that takes place during the meal. As they're at supper, Jesus gets up from the table, takes a basin of water and a towel, and he begins to wash the disciples' feet. When he's finished, he says to them, you call me master and teacher. And that is right, for that is indeed what I am. And if I, your master and teacher, so wash your feet, so you shall do the same to one another. And so now, as our gospel lesson opens with the words, he has gone out, the he is Judas, who is left to betray Jesus. To those who remain, he now declares that God has been glorified. How so? Certainly in the cross, the resurrection, that will be God's ultimate glory. But as Jesus is speaking, they're still sitting in that room with damp towels, with freshly washed feet. How is God glorified? God is glorified when we serve one another. God is glorified when we serve one another in the most simple and mundane ways. And that is really in that daily serving, that is how we love one another, and that is how we become one. And so Jesus' greatest hope for his followers, his church, is it will be a place marked by unity, marked by love. And why is that so important? Because Jesus knew something that we usually learn the hard way, and that is that you can't be a Christian by yourself. You know, occasionally I'll be talking to someone who's been away from church for a while. They'll talk about maybe when they went away to college, or they got busy with work and the kids, or they wanted a morning to sleep in or play golf or whatever, and they just kind of fell away. But they'll almost always add, but I believe in God and I pray every day. I just don't believe you have to go to church to be a Christian. And certainly there's some truth to that. I mean, I would agree that simply sitting in church no more makes you a Christian than sitting in the garage makes you a car. But I do believe that unless you are a part of a community, you will never grow. Your faith will shrivel, it will die. And when you think about it, the whole idea of a me and Jesus Christianity isn't even possible. It's an illusion. Because faith isn't just sitting around thinking happy thoughts about God, not thinking happy thoughts about Jesus. The only way that we love the God we cannot see is by loving our neighbor whom we can see. We need other people even to have faith. You can't be a Christian by yourself. And so Jesus tells his disciples, my little children, my little precious ones. This is not Patton getting ready to command the army. I mean, this is Jesus talking to these precious ones, these ones who are so dear, so precious to him. And he's saying that your whole world, you don't realize what's about to take place. I tell you, your whole world is about to be upset, turned upside down, but then it will be turned up right side up. But in the process, you're going to find that you need each other. You need each other far more than you can possibly imagine, far more than you realize at the time. And so you must find a way to love one another, to serve one another, to be in community with one another, to love one another. And so much that kind of community marked by love, by oneness, what might that community look back like? And I'd kind of like us to walk back through those lessons from the geese and see what that might mean. Number one is geese flap their wings, they create an updraft for the bird immediately following. And by flying in that V formation, it's estimated that the flock can travel at least 70% further than if each bird flew alone. First, the geese speak to us of cooperation. And as congregations, when we are on the same page, when we are working towards the same goal and heading in the same direction, certainly we do far more than when each of us are trying to do it alone. Number two, when a goose begins to fall out of formation and begins to feel the drag and the resistance of going alone, and quickly moves back into formation to take advantage of the lift of the bird in front of it. The geese speak to us of community. You know, life isn't easy. Sometimes we feel alone. We might feel withdrawn or overwhelmed. And I know how much I need the uplift, the encouragement of my brothers and sisters in Christ. You know, how much I need that support. I know how much you need that support of one another in your community. We need each other far more than we're usually willing to admit or imagine. And we're not good at acknowledging weakness or need. We would much rather go it alone. And the geese remind us we're in it together. Lesson number 3, when the lead goose gets tired, it rotates back along the wing. Another bird moves up to fly the point. And so the geese speak to us of leadership. And that is a lesson we need to hear. Because sadly, the leadership model we often use in church is where you find someone to do something, a task, and then you don't let them go until they burn out or become resentful, and they fall away. Or sometimes leadership in a church is held by just a small group of people so that others don't have the opportunity or the privilege of serving. And so there are times we're reminded when each of us needs to step up, to fly the point, to take greater responsibility. And there are other times when we're each called to move back along the way and let others move forward. Leadership is best when it's shared. No one individual has the strength, the gifts to lead alone. The geese speak to us of leadership. Lesson 4, only the geese at the back of the formation honk, apparently to encourage those at the front to keep up the pace. And so the geese speak to us of encouragement. I heard people kind of chuckle when I first read that one. And it's true because, boy, there can be all kinds of honking that goes on in congregations. Sometimes not particularly helpful, can be more hurtful. But over the years as a pastor, I can't tell you how much encouragement I have experienced. How often, how many times a note or a phone call or a kind word has come at just the right time. I also know there's been times when I've fallen short or made a mistake, and how much easier it is when someone's come to me in a gentle and kind and direct, straightforward way. And I'm sure that's true for each of us. All of us as Christians have tremendous opportunities to encourage, to support, to care for one another. Finally, when a goose is sick or injured, 2 geese fall out of the formation and follow it to the ground. They stay with it until it dies or it's able to fly again. And only then do they rejoin their original flock, or they're taken in by another group. And so the geese speak to us of family. It's been said that the church is the only army that shoots its wounded. And sadly, that can be true. We can be so ugly, we can be so judgmental. And yet I've also seen so many times when the church family has rallied around someone going through a tough time. It might be financial support, it might be a meal brought in a time of illness, or simple a word of assurance, telling someone, you are in my prayers. I'm here for you. The church has the opportunity to create a family that is able to stand with people from cradle to grave. And it is amazing what a simple flock of geese can show us about what it means to be the church. The geese, though, are lucky. They're able to have that kind of community through instinct. They just be geese. For us, though, it takes a lot of hard work. It goes against many of our instincts. in the 12th chapter of the book of Job, there's a beautiful little passage. It says, "But now ask the beasts, and let them teach you, and the birds of the heavens, and let them tell you. Or speak to the earth, and let it teach you, and let the fish of the sea declare to you. Who among these does not know that the hand of the Lord has done these things?" I pray this morning that we would listen to the geese and learn from them, that we would see our congregation not as a casual gathering of random individuals, but as a body, a community, a family, people on a common journey, called to live and to serve one another in one, people who need each other if they're going to ever make it to their final destination. And I tell you, if this church, if our churches were able to resemble a flock of geese in our ministry to one another, in our ministry to the world, people indeed would take notice for Jesus' sake. Amen.